Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the Crash and Ride podcast. I'm Patrick Ferguson. I'm your host. Today's guest is Gus Engstrom, a musician and promoter from Charlotte, North Carolina. Gus plays in the band Powered Takeoff, but as a promoter, he's brought tons of great punk and noise rock shows to Charlotte. One of the clubs he's used most often is a place called the Milestone. The Milestone is this punk landmark in Charlotte. Black Flag played there in the early days, as did the Minutemen, as did REM, as did Guadalcanal Diary, as did Pylon, as did the B-52s. Everybody played the Milestone. My band's played there through the years many times, and the only thing that's really changed is it's got more stickers and it's gotten a tiny bit more smelly. But other than that, it's like this moment in time that is preserved in amber, and I highly recommend if you're ever in the area, go see a show at the Milestone. In other news, I'm super stoked to announce that local coffee roaster Jittery Joe's is now making a Crash and Ride espresso blend. I've had a couple of different versions of it, and we finally settled on one we all like, and I think it's delicious, and it's great for if you're medicating your ADD like I do with caffeine. Man, I have got a treat for you. It's going to be available on Jittery Joe's web store soon, but also I'm going to make it available as one of the Patreon contribution levels, and I haven't decided how much that's going to be yet. I'm going to try to figure out what's fair. So say if you pledge $25-$30 a month on the Patreon page, in addition to supporting the show, I'm also going to send you a can of Crash and Ride espresso every month so we can all be anxious and sweaty together. In other news, Pinky Doodle Poodle is currently out on the road. Here are the shows coming up. May 1st, we're playing Canton, Ohio at the Buzzbin Arts and Music Shop. May 4th, we're playing Buffalo, New York at the Buffalo History Museum at 1:30 p.m. That's part of the Cherry Blossom Festival. May 5th, we're playing Buffalo again at the History Museum the next day, but at 12:15 in the afternoon. May 6th, we're playing Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania at Howlers. And then May 8th, we're playing in Spartanburg, South Carolina at Ground Zero. Come see the shows. I'd love to meet you. I'd love to shake your hand. Let's talk it out and hang out. Remember, if you're having a bad time and you're contemplating thoughts of self-harm, if you need to reach out and get help, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is always there for you. It's 24/7. It's free. It's confidential. That number is 1-800-273-8255. Call them if you need help. 1-800-273-8255. My man Thor Harris is back in the country. We're trying to get together to do an interview soon. Look for that sometime in May. Me and Thor are going to talk it out, and it's going to be great. Okay, that's all the news I got. Let's jump into our interview with Gus Engstrom. Okay, we're here with Gus Engstrom. I know him as the guy from the amazing noise rock band Powered Takeoff from the Charlotte area, but he also seems to be someone who's always been around the Carolina noise rock scene, particularly around Charlotte. Welcome, Gus.
Thanks for having me, Patrick.
Man, so for someone who grew up rural like I did, the Powered Takeoff is the part of the tractor that just maims people. Is that where the name came from?
Pretty much.
Yeah, so for people who've never been around a tractor, agricultural equipment that you drag behind a tractor often has its own moving parts, and that power is delivered from the tractor motor to the drag behind equipment through a piece of machinery called the Powered Takeoff. And hooking up threshers or harrows or anything to that is always where people lose. Like, that's how you get dragged into the equipment and murdered by your gear.
90% of farm accidents.
Yeah, that's a wicked.
Clothing, if anything, something you're holding can get sucked into it and pulled around it, and then it's not good. And I was in a band called Grids, and for the album insert, we had a whole bunch of pictures of people that had been in farm accidents.
Oh my God!
Of a Powered Takeoff. So that was kind of the catapult to get the name.
Yeah, like guys like my grandpa always had two blades on their knife. One they used for things like peeling apples or cutting baling twine or whatever, and then there was the blade they never used because they wanted it to be razor sharp in case they ever had to cut themselves out of a piece of equipment. Yeah. It's people underestimate the pure like metal nature of rural life.
Yeah, they're a lot more dangerous than people think.
Yeah.
I mean, I know people in Kansas that were killed by their tractors.
Yeah. Well, those tricycle tractors, man, they'll just roll over on you at the drop of a hat.
Yeah. You don't hear about it this part of the country as much, but definitely the more rural you get, it's definitely more common.
Yeah. So you're in Powered Takeoff now. You were in Grid before, but there were some other bands I know that you were involved with and you've always been around the sort of Carolina noise rock scene. Tell me a little bit about your history as a musician.
Well, I was kind of a late bloomer. I was just a kid who went to shows for years. And then one day I just was like, well, shit, I've been setting up shows for people for years. I should do this. And just kind of being around other people. I took some guitar lessons for a while and got what I thought were the basics down from a guy that's like a pretty famous Nashville session picker.
Who's that?
His name was Randy Mullis here in Concord. And he's been on a bunch of records. Him and his dad, they own a vintage store in Concord.
Good.
But I learned from them and got the basics down. But of course they never wanted to teach me anything I wanted to know.
Right.
And
they wanted to do a lot of Travis picking and that kind of thing. And you were like, I want to make records that make speakers explode.
Yeah. And even then I was like, hey, can you teach me some ZZ Top? And, and that was still a little bit out of the wheelhouse a bit.
Wow.
But it was still a start. But I mean, this is a place you can walk into today here in Concord, where I live, North Carolina. And they'll have 4 or 5 6-pedal steels for sale.
Oh, wow.
So it's
a little bit a great resource.
Store. But also regular Les Pauls, Telecasters, Martins, J45 Gibsons, very good selection, but there's definitely a slant towards country.
Yeah. So, for pickers.
Yep.
Yeah. For those of you who aren't familiar with North Carolina, especially around the Charlotte metro area, Concord is north of there and is where it just starts to transition back into rural, but Concord has always been a mill town.
Yep.
Isn't there I remember you and I talked about this. I'm from not far from there in North Carolina, and we talked about how the highway kind of splits. Is it Concord and Gastonia?
Concord and Kannapolis.
That's right. And then one side of 85 is mostly mill workers, and the other side is kind of like the more white collar.
It's been an interesting place to live. I moved here in 1980 from Kansas.
You were born in Kansas?
Yeah.
What part of Kansas?
Junction City, which is right where the Flint Hills start to end, and it starts to just open up to the wasteland that is Western Kansas. It's right near Manhattan, which is where Kansas State University is.
Right.
Fort Riley, which is the 1st Infantry Division of the U.S. Army. But yeah, I grew up there till 80 and then moved here, and it was kind of a life-changing experience in many ways. I wonder what my life would have been like if I'd have never moved here.
How old were you when you moved?
I was 9.
Okay. What brought your family to Concord?
My dad was a Pizza Hut franchisee.
Yeah.
And he had an opportunity someone asked him if he wanted to change his life. And my dad had only been in the Navy and traveled around doing that. He was a high school dropout and ended up in this opportunity where these people believed in him and moved us down here. And, it was really kind of shitty, according to my dad in the beginning. Stores weren't good. At that time, Concord was about 20,000 people, and I thought 19,500 of them were rednecks. And I just didn't know where we had ended up. Because it was different kind of a redneck than like a Midwestern farm guy, kind of a country guy to me in a lot of ways. But I don't know. I was just kind of a kid that rode a BMX bike around all the time and, didn't caused, I guess, my fair share of trouble, but played sports like everybody else.
Yeah.
But, then all of a sudden we're living next to the ocean within 3 hours of an ocean.
Right.
And that was just a completely different world for me.
Yeah. Well, and by 1980, so growing up in Eden, North Carolina, where I grew up, we had a Fieldcrest and a couple other textile mills. And 1980 was right when the push came to crush the unions in the textile mills. And so I imagine you guys were kind of front row for a lot of that conflict too, although at 9 you probably weren't aware of it. No,
I mean, Cannon Mills' headquarters were here in Kannapolis. And
right.
All the workers lived in Kannapolis, and all the city people lived in Concord.
Right.
That's where all the executives lived.
Right.
So, it was like a little rich town.
Right.
But I lived in the county and kind of saw that from afar. And I was just kind of a pretty happy-go-lucky kid at that point. And of course, everything changes as you get older. But
Right.
that's when I started dealing with more. As a kid, I never had any anxiety, never felt depressed, never felt anything. Life was pretty grand. And, as I got older, that's when all that stuff started to like really creep in and haunt me. But it took a long time.
So what were your first sort of experiences with anxiety?
I didn't really experience anxiety till I was well out of college.
Oh, interesting.
Yep. I just kind of didn't give a shit about a lot of stuff. And a lot of that was in high school. Like I dressed, I was into punk rock and wore an Army field jacket to school, and I shaved my head and was definitely not like the other kids there.
There was some North Carolina hardcore though. Like I remember, growing up, there were those bands that were out of Western North Carolina, like around, I want to say Morganton. I'm confused now. I can't remember if the band Vex was from Macon, Georgia, or from Western North Carolina. But there was like a scene already, like around the Milestone and.
Oh yeah, there was that band Bloodmobile. Those kids were from Morganton.
That's who I'm thinking of. That's it. It's Bloodmobile.
Yep, a little bit Morganton, a little bit Statesville.
Yeah.
But of course, we had anti-scene here, and people forget they have a long history, and it was way before all the stupid theatrics that they've sort of embraced the past 20 years. They were a very cutting-edge punk rock band in their day. An African-American bass player who, Marlon Cherry.
Uh-huh.
I think that's his first name. But he's just, but you can go back and look at the first early records. There's pictures of them with an African-American bass player. And
they're playing next Thursday night in Atlanta.
Are they really?
Yeah. A buddy of mine called me today. It was like, are you going to go see the show? And I have a show with another band that night. I'm sort of tempted to go check it out. It is kind of amazing to think about a punk band that was so hell-bent on self-destruction now entering their 40th year. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah. And people see Jeff Clayton now, and I mean, he's well into his 50s, and he's not even. I don't even look at him as a punk rock guy. I look at him as a guy who collects like Stax records, because I mean, he's into just that kind of stuff now. He doesn't listen to any of that stuff. But it's just weird how that stuff has kind of and even COC is still playing shows.
Yeah.
Sort of stood the test of time. I mean, granted, they've evolved into something different. From the first time.
That Animosity record never left my turntable for about 2 years.
Oh yeah. I mean, I saw them for the first time on a skateboard ramp because it was they went hand in hand with skateboarding back in that day.
Yeah, and they had that logo, man, that was just like tailor made for going on the back of a denim jacket you cut the arms out of.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that guy Errol Engelbright from Raleigh is a tattoo artist. He drew that. And,
oh no shit! So we know who did the original COC logo. It never occurred to me to even ask who the genius was behind that logo.
And I think I've heard a story he didn't get anything for it.
Oh, for God's sakes!
Yeah. But I mean, I think that's the case with a lot of those logos from that era.
Yeah, but when Eye for an Eye came out, their first record, they didn't have two nickels to rub together. I mean,
no, not at all. And in a lot of ways, it's and then they kind of lost me at Technocracy. A little bit. I wasn't so much into like crossover hardcore.
Yeah, no, same. Like I was definitely into the early stuff, but then, we sound like a couple old punk dudes now. Well, the first two records, but yeah, like I remember at some point, like 10 years ago, somebody mentioned that COC was playing. I was like, what? They're still that exists still, but they evolved into this dirt metal thing that I was sort of a part of when I was playing at Music Hates You, and fucking great, man. More power to them.
Yeah, I mean, a couple years ago they did a reunion though with the original, still the same three people, but they were playing Animosity and Eye for an Eye songs.
What? Shit! I wish I'd seen that. I've loved those records so much. I remember Mike Dean left COC and I ran into him in Atlanta, and he was like hanging out with this hippie girl, and they had just come back from Hawaii. They were like just bumming around. Like he had, I think, a little bit of money from COC when he quit, and they were just like selling beads off blankets at like little 5 points and like dreadlocks and and staph infections and all that stuff. And living the crusty lifestyle. And
yeah, he was the true hippie punk kind
yeah,
of.
I think the original. Yeah,
Yeah.
in many ways. So you're in high school, into loud, aggressive music, and you went to college. Where'd you go?
I went to the University of Kansas in Lawrence.
Oh, you went back to Kansas.
Yep. I just needed to reboot, I guess. I guess you could say. And in a lot of ways, there was a lot of other things that drew me there. The summer before I went to college, somebody had told me that William S. Burroughs lived in Lawrence.
Right.
And
I was going to ask if you saw him when you were there.
Well, I stalked him.
Oh, boy.
And I was told by somebody, "You want to get shot?" And
Right.
I was like, "What?" And they were like, "He carries a gun. He'll shoot you. You shouldn't be following him."
Yeah, keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah. I was really curious where he lived.
Right.
And so I, of course, followed him. I saw him on campus. And I just kept walking, and he kept walking as well. And I had a good idea. And now, some years later, some of my friends were actually like friends with him.
Good.
And I had no idea. Like, there's a picture of my friend that was in this band called Panel Donor, and this band Zoom from Lawrence. He likes to shoot guns with him.
No kidding.
There's like pictures on the internet of that, and which is kind of nuts to think about. But I guess I was just like, wow, I have to go here. Like, I guess I could go to Chapel Hill, or I could go to NC State. But man, there must be something in the water that a writer of his caliber would choose to live in Lawrence, Kansas.
I think that it was something about being in the geographical center of the United States.
Yeah.
I recall that being a justification that somebody offered at some point for the reason that William S. Burroughs would choose Lawrence, Kansas.
Yeah, but in a lot of ways too, supposedly that's where Kerouac was before he took off and wrote On the Road.
Yeah, no kidding. I didn't know that.
There was and a lot of those people seem to sort of gravitate to there. Like, I used to hear stories of Timothy Leary being in town.
I mean, I played there back in the day. We played at the was it the Jazz House that was in Lawrence?
Yeah, there was like upstairs, and then there was the Bottleneck too, which was like
and we played there too.
Like the 40 watt of Lawrence.
Right. And then there was the Army surplus place right across from the Jazz House called Looking for Something. Remember that place?
Yep.
I mean, I went in there and bought all kinds of, back then the Army jacket was your sort of like, if you couldn't afford the Ramones biker jacket, you wore a M65 Army field jacket.
Yep.
And I remember buying.
Lawrence was a very magical place. Because in those days, everybody played there. And had a very supportive music scene. And it makes me sound like the old guy, but it really was a different time, like even 90 through 94.
It's hard to communicate to people now the sort of role that outsider music played in society then. Like, they use punk rock to sell Nissans and bubblegum now, but like back then, as there's I saw this like meme sort of around the internet once that was a picture from that Penelope Spheres film Suburbia, and it said, "I was into punk rock back when it was called Hey Faggot."
Yeah, I thought that was my name for a long time.
Right, exactly.
When I ride around on a skateboard, that was hollered out of the window of a Camaro or a truck enough times at me. Thought somebody had physically changed my name.
Yeah, it's sort of an interesting thing to think about, like how commodified it's become compared to what it was like back in the day. But yeah, so you're in college in Lawrence, and you came back to Concord after that, or did you go somewhere else?
No, I did. I came back to Concord, and I eventually made my way back here, and I just went to work for my dad.
Yeah.
And I don't know how in the world that sort of happened, but it just sort of did. And it's kind of one of those things where the next thing you know, you blink your eye and you've been here,
Yeah.
My daughter was born in 97. And that was, of course, a huge life-changing thing for me.
Yeah.
In many ways. I don't know if I was ready to be a parent, but I don't ever ready to be a parent.
Man, we we tried for many years to start a family the old-fashioned way, and then we ended up adopting. So we were ready, but we weren't ready for a 2-year-old. We were planning to adopt an infant, and then we got a call on a Thursday, and we adopted our daughter on the Sunday. So we ran around for an entire 3-day weekend, like putting things on higher shelves, because we had to get things out of the danger zone. Our house still kind of looks like one of those Dr. Seuss upside down trees. Like things are definitely thinner from waist level down. Like all the outlets are still plugged and all the dangerous stuff is on higher shelves. But yeah. So you had your daughter in '97. Were you playing any music at this point, or are you still?
No.
I know you were promoting shows during that time.
Yeah, it's still booking a lot of stuff. There was a club here in called Fat City, in Charlotte, and
Right.
it was kind of this little deli, but it seemed like all the stuff we ran through there was everything of that era,
Right.
the late '90s, and I thought it was all pretty great. Like.
Yeah.
Fucking champs.
Yeah.
I remember, like pre-internet, people used to call my parents' house. That's the number I always left. And hey, I get there and there's this guy's left a message. His name is Brad Davis. And next thing you know, I'm like, hey, calling back. Hey, I'm in this band called Fu Manchu. You think you could help us get a show or something? We just need like $100. And I booked them for like $100.
Yeah.
And now they're just way bigger than that. There were
Yeah.
just little moments like that.
Yeah, I had Noelle Shuck from She He He in for an interview the other day, and she hadn't even heard of the Book Your Own Fucking Life book.
Wow.
Do you remember that book?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean it was the Bible for years.
Well, I remember when everybody, when you'd meet another touring band, you would ask to look at their booking book, and you would write something down in a spiral notebook, and everything. You had a page for each state, and contact people and phone numbers, and then it morphed into email addresses, and then as the computer changed everything.
Yeah, well, MySpace became the sort of de facto booking machine for the kind of. I think MySpace is what killed the Book Your Own Life book.
Yep.
But I was, for a while there, I was running a wiki that was like. It was an invitation thing, and I would invite all these musicians, and we would like have like a booking, like a state by state, like here are the clubs in the state, but even more down in a granular detail, like here are the clubs, and here is the place where you can go poop near the club, like a locking door on a bathroom. And here's a place with a decent cup of coffee near the club, and here's where you can get vegan food near the club, and here's a promoter you need to fucking avoid. And if you deal with this promoter and he looks like he's getting antsy and starts looking like he's going to leave after the second band, put somebody on him because he's going to duck out without paying the headliner. And and I was keeping that going for a while, but just so much information at people's fingertips. It was hard to get people outside of this region who I couldn't like walk up and shake their hand and like make eye contact with to kind of get in. Like there were some great guys from Milwaukee in that band. If I had a hi-fi, they were fully invested in. There were some New York people too, but like it was hard to keep it going. And then like that database got hacked, and I had some spyware running, not spyware, but malware running on my my database, and I just trashed the whole thing. It was kind of a sad day.
Yeah, see, I even grew up even in that world, the next level below that, where it was all DIY,
right?
Like house shows, VFW halls.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember the first couple times I booked a show at an actual club, I was really nervous, and like, oh man, I don't have any control over this, and at least at so-and-so's house, I felt like I had control because everything was like super loose. Like there was a house called Dick Street in Greensboro, North Carolina. Yeah. And like Born Against played there. I mean, you name it, but it was all real underground. Like that band Heroin from San Diego. I was way into like San Diego hardcore, like Gravity Records stuff. But it was just such a weird layer where it seems like for years, all I did was go to house shows and book house shows or, a weird event space, but definitely not a bar with alcohol. I mean,
there's liability.
Yeah, well, it never even dawned on me. I mean, people were too busy drinking in their car anyway. Because I was the kid, I guess, that never really identified with DC hardcore.
Interesting.
I had already sort of let the cat out of the bag, so to speak, with everything. So I didn't get straight edge. I got Black Flag, and I identified more with like Poison Idea.
Oh boy,
that kind of just the thuggish mentality, you know. Never like putting an X on your hands, vegetarian, vegan, none of that stuff. I was like just the worst person compared to those people because drank alcohol, ate a hamburger, So I felt like Ian MacKaye was definitely not talking to me. I like it as a band, but it just never spoke to me like the SST stuff did. I don't know.
It's definitely it's interesting how labels kind of end up like record labels from that era end up sort of defining not just a sound but a fucking mood. Like there were all these SST bands that were like not hardcore. Was it DC3? Was that DC3 and Worm and all those other sort of almost like punk psychedelic bands that were also on SST, SWA, and then of course there was all the Black Flag and the Minutemen and all the other spinoffs from Black Flag, but the DC scene was so much more uptight, with Minor Threat and Egg Hunt and that whole thing.
But in the 90s, I did get into it, I didn't like all of it, but I really loved Hoover. I loved Nation of Ulysses.
Great band.
Stuff like that. And Circus Lupus. That stuff just really kind of spoke to me as well, And I guess I've always just sort of gravitated to that. Well, I mean, not that I hated Fugazi or Jawbox. I saw them all many times and owned the records. It was just, there was something about those other bands were just a little bit dangerous. Yeah. Like Circus Lupus. Like I remember seeing Chris Thompson kind of come unhinged and I liked it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was definitely like an element of danger that doesn't seem to, it's hard to find it anymore in music, certainly. But like there was that band Crash Worship that used to like do an annual Mardi Gras show in a warehouse, and there was always fire. Like it was like pre-Great White, the station fire, and there was indoor fire and naked people and blood. You booked Crash Worship?
Yes. Yeah.
How was that? How'd that go?
It was insane. The promoter or the club owner just flipped out. They only got to play for about 40 minutes because unbeknownst to anybody, somebody had drug a 55-gallon drum into the club, and it's yes, set it on fire. And it was crazy. They played at the Duke Coffee House.
Oh man, we got shut down there. Powder Room got shut down there because our fog machine turned on the smoke alarm. So I can't, and the fucking fire department came and everything. So I can't imagine what happened with Crash Worship there.
But see, back then it was a little different. Like this was the era when the Shellac on Ad Action Park had come out. Mm-hmm. They had Harvey Milk open for them.
Oh, wow.
And Mount Shasta.
Uh-huh.
So they seem to be in like Universal Order of Armageddon, and Bikini Kill played there about this time.
Yeah.
It was a wild time. But the irony of all that, what you're saying, is at the end of that, they ended up in Asheville, and they played at that club called 31 Patton Street.
Yep, played there.
That it burned to the ground right after they played.
Oh, gosh.
And they don't know if something started the night they were there.
Oh, I mean, when you say it burned to the ground after they played, you mean like after they played, like not like some time after they played, but like that might have been the Crash Worship show that caused the club to burn down.
Yeah, I've never been confirmed that, but within a day or two after, I think the club burned to the ground.
Wild.
Yeah, but that band was, that band was a huge kind of influence on Power Takeoff in some way with the rhythmic and just the repetition.
Yeah.
It just beat a rhythm into the ground.
Sure.
But of course, there's no nudity, people throwing Roman candles around and stuff like that.
Right.
But but they were to try to tell people today of a band like that if you've never heard them,
right? People
kind of don't know what to make of it.
Yeah, that doesn't really translate to vinyl or whatever, or digital or whatever the medium people listen to. Well, let me play you some of the music, and people are like, oh yeah, it's kind of noisy. You're like, it's really hard to help you understand like what this was like at like, filling, loosening volume and
Right.
and also the possibility that you might get trapped in a fire, or like a dreadlocked woman might run by with no top on, bleeding from a self-inflicted like cutting wound. Like it was just a very strange time.
Yeah, I don't think people, and I think that a lot of music suffers from that. Um, I feel like Power Takeoff does in some way.
Yeah,
Um,
it's hard to communicate the sort of the live experience
right.
through
And
two speakers. Yeah,
and I
or
want,
earbuds, for God's sakes. Like,
yeah,
yeah,
I wanted to move people, not just with anything I had to say, but physically. I wanted to put people in a, I sort of identify with that crazy swans notion where let's make the room like super hot and uncomfortable and
hmm,
just orally take your mind to another place.
right.
The sound levels and the pressure. I mean, I don't know. I guess I kind of get off on that in some way,
Well,
but
when I saw the Swans with Sonic Youth at the Metroplex, it felt like we were living inside an accordion. Like the room just the pressure kept changing as
right.
they would play, and it was very, very intense.
I don't know. But that's just something that I guess I figure I'll be 48 this year. I have
Yeah,
to have something to sort of make this band interesting. I'm not going to start the next war and wear
right,
costumes or something.
right,
So
right.
everybody has something, and I feel like my something is just. I guess unfortunately my bands are known for being ridiculously loud.
Yeah, yeah. So when did the anxiety start in all of this?
Well, probably in the early to mid 2000s. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I went to Ireland with my family,
Mm-hmm.
and I was getting in a van, and someone told me to get in the very back.
Yeah.
And so I got in the very back, and then someone took the seat in front of me and locked the seat down because it kind of flipped forward. And when it did, it pinned my legs up against, to where I could not move. And all of a sudden, I realized, holy shit, the headrest is like touching my head. And I had never felt claustrophobia or any form of anxiety before that. Like I used to get in the back of cars and ride 3 hours to Chapel Hill to go see a band on a
Right.
Tuesday, and be completely uncomfortable. Now, if someone told me I had to do that, I don't even want to get in the back seat of a car because I feel like I'm not in control. And all of a sudden, my heart rate just starts to go through the roof. And that's
Uh-huh.
the first time I ever felt anxiety in my life. And it was crippling. Like I felt like I couldn't breathe.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. It's
How
something.
how did it play out in this van trip? Like,
Well,
did you pull the plug on being like jammed into the back of the van, or?
I did. I started just complaining and cussing at my dad and my uncle. And
Mm-hmm.
my dad was telling me to shut up and stay there. And
All right. So when you say your family, I was sort of picturing your daughter. This is with your dad and uncle.
it's like a complete family trip.
Sure. Okay.
There's like 20 of my family members from Kansas, all in Ireland.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was kind of a nuts trip.
Mm-hmm.
And my daughter's young at this point. My uncle undoes the seat. I come forward. I get out. He's like, take a break. Take a break. Pats me on the back. He's now passed away. He was an awesome dude. But he
Mm-hmm.
could see that I was literally not in a good place.
Has
So
your uncle? Do you know if he ever suffered from anxiety?
he probably did. He was Vietnam vet that
Oh boy.
was in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Never talked about it.
Yeah.
Um,
Got
he,
some of that in my family too.
he hid intestinal cancer from the family for a long time, and when he finally kind of came clean, it was a long, terrible ride to the bottom.
Oh boy.
Yep. But he was just a very stoic. But my dad was that way too. My dad would always, my dad was rough, and like there's nothing wrong with you. You're okay. You
Rub
just
some
need,
dirt in it.
yeah, you just need to suck it up.
Yeah.
Was always his attitude about it, and he never understood. And it was just ways where then I would sort of plan my life out to where I don't have to get in the back seat of the car.
Right.
I don't have to be in a claustrophobic, confining situation. I really worked very hard at manipulating my life. And if someone would put me in a situation where I felt anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
run. run, 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 and
Yeah.
get away.
I mean, modern life can be like one series of anxious events, though. It's like,
Yeah, it is.
how did you manage? And also, at some point, you became a single dad.
I did. God, that was in the early 2000s.
Uh-huh.
And that didn't really make me anxious. That just made me scared, you know?
Well, wait a minute. So, was this before or after the Ireland trip that you became a single dad?
I was a single dad before the Ireland trip.
Huh. Really?
Yep.
Because
Yep.
it seems like maybe the anxiety might be concurrent with the incredible, like, you know, when you become a single parent, your responsibility doesn't just double. It amplifies exponentially because there's just no break.
Right. Well, I had a mom. My mom was here,
Mm-hmm.
and it was kind of, and I had a little bit of help from other, like my sister, and
Sure.
and my dad in his own weird little way. But it was kind
Yeah.
of, it takes a village, kind of
Right.
mentality.
Sure.
And that was totally in play through most of that time. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Cameron's mom just, I don't think really wants to be a mom. Not
Yeah.
not in the the sense that everybody wants her to be there. It's kind of more like she wants to be a mom on her terms, and
Yeah.
that you cannot do that, especially with a small child.
Sure.
And
I
so,
remember I thought that I knew what it was going to mean to become a dad and how it would, like people were like, it's going to change your life completely. And I'd be like, yep, got it. It's going to change my life completely. And they would be like, yeah, okay, buddy. And what I was thinking about how being a dad would change my life was the dust on the tip of the iceberg on how profoundly my life changed.
yep. I mean, I remember one day my daughter was really sick, and I didn't know what to do. I'm by myself in my house. I call my parents; they're out of town. I'm panicking. My dad's like, "You're fine. Just blah blah blah." There's not, quit being such a hypochondriac. Whatever. My mom
Right.
on the phone reassures me. Give her some Motrin. Do this, do that. But it was that first big moment of she's sick, and I have to take care of her. And am I up for this challenge? Like sometimes I feel like I couldn't take care of myself.
Or how old was she at this point?
She's probably 6 or 7.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's like schools are germ factories and kids are sick
Yes.
all the time, and you just have to deal with it. But
Yeah.
it seems like only yesterday I was dealing with that, and now she's 21 years old.
Yeah.
It's a different thing. I mean, it all goes by so fast
Mm-hmm.
because it just all runs together. And I'm not sure if it really does that or my sister I'm not sure if all of that played a part in all that. But I know it didn't help my anxiety, and I know it just took my depression to a level that I never saw coming.
So did you have anxiety attacks, panic attacks?
I think I would.
Yeah.
But by then I was drinking a lot, and
Okay.
which is not a good thing to medicate with.
No.
And of course, not when I would go to the doctor, I would never say, "Hey, I get kind of weird sometimes." I didn't want to talk about it to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really even address it till after my father died, and I really kind of lost my shit. And because then a lot of responsibility was thrown on me, and I felt like that heightened everything.
Yeah, of course.
They
Of course.
told me I had to run part of my dad's business,
Uh-huh.
and just sent me into a kind of a tail. It was the weirdest, most depressing time of my life.
Mm-hmm.
But to do it, I joined Grids, which at that point I was in my late 30s,
Yeah.
and those kids were in their early 20s,
Yeah.
and I just took a chance. I had seen them play, and I liked them, as people. And their bass player, I guess, just decided he'd rather go out on dates than show up at practice. So they booted him out of the band. And, I was like, "Hey, I don't know. I'm not a very good bass player." "Well, we really like you as a person. And, do you have a bass? Do you want to come do this?" And that was the first time I'd ever played bass in a band. And I just jumped right in and just completely changed the band. But it changed me in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It was into what I needed.
Was it you feel like it was a turning point with your anxiety and depression to find this outlet?
Oh, totally. I realized,
Interesting.
but I did start going to therapy as well. I was, for years I thought therapy's for, assholes. Kind of
Right.
like, I didn't think it worked. And, but I did. It took me a couple minutes to find the right therapist, so to speak. But I
That's
found an
often the
amazing,
case.
yep, I found an amazing person who didn't believe in, drugging you up on medication,
Hmm.
believed in journaling and just lots of open dialogue. And it's just and maybe it was my personality, but it's just what I needed.
Well, I
And
mean, you sort of described your dad as this incredibly stoic, Midwestern, like sort of almost prototypical Midwestern farmer who actually became a business owner. And that doesn't, when you sort of picture someone in therapy, like that's exactly the guy that your dad would have been like, like what, like, do you think you got problems, buddy?
oh yeah, yeah,
But that attitude kills people, especially men. The
oh yeah.
suicide rate among men in America right now is the highest per capita that I think it's ever been.
I mean, just to kind of tell you a little bit about my dad in a comparison, my dad had huge anger issues,
Yeah,
and that manifested itself out on me and
sure.
other people around him. My mother convinced him to go to anger management, and
Oh
at this
yeah.
he had a stroke and he needed to be driven back and forth. So one day my mother says, "Can you pick your father up at after his therapy and bring him back?" Well, he comes sashaying out the door with his cane, with this big shit-eating grin on his face, and he says, "Well, I'm all done." And I was like, "Yeah, yeah. So when do you have to go back?" He said, "No, no, I'm done." I was like, "You're done?" I was like, "How many times have you been?" He's like, "Oh, 5 or 6. He said I didn't need to come back. He said I was good. And I said, "He said you were good. What did you tell him? Or better yet, what did you not tell him?" So I called my mother and I said, "You will never believe this." She came and met me and she said, "Get in the car." She drove him over there, and to the end of his life, he was still in therapy. And
Yeah,
I'm not
good.
sure he ever sorted it out, but he didn't want to sort it out.
No, it's
He didn't
hard,
have
man.
a problem.
Therapy's hard. If you're doing it right, it's hard.
Yep. Yeah,
It's
yeah, I agree. It should be a lot of, and a lot of tears and a lot of heartache, and it's
yeah.
off a lot of band-aids. And
One of our recent guests on this podcast was talking about heavy duty journaling, and there's a book that I've just started reading on his recommendation by a Dr. Sarno. And the book was about sort of or handling back pain that's a manifestation of anger. Like, his whole thing is that like these unhealthy bottling of anger can cause us these physical manifestations like chronic back pain and whatever. And I've just started reading it, and I haven't really gotten to like what I'm supposed to be journaling about. But journaling seems to be a really good coping mechanism for a lot of people who deal with anxiety.
it's helped me. I mean, and this is the way she had it all kind of had me. She had me carry a little handheld little notebook in my pocket.
Mm-hmm.
I never carried a pen around, but I now carry a pen with me every day. She
Mm-hmm.
said, "You're going to forget a lot of the things that are going to piss you off during the week, but I want you to write them down. Like if you're driving and somebody cuts you off and it really just pisses you off and you feel like you need to retaliate for some reason." She says, "Well, if you get a second after that, write that down. Write down the day it was and write that down. And then tell me, then at the end of the day, write down the good things too. If something really great happens, write that down too. But I want you at the end of the day to kind of like surmise everything that you've done and, tell me how like, are you still angry? Have you never really cooled down?" And then, 'cause she's like, "You just need to realize that all this stuff matters. And there's some of it that you can control and that you can't control." And
Yeah.
that's a lot of it with me. It's control. It's like when you go on tour, there's only so much you're in control of.
Yes.
You're in control of you, and you don't know if the van's going to break down. You don't know if you're going to have equipment issues, if the show's not going to happen. There are just things out of your control.
Yeah,
And
mutual respect is a huge part of touring successfully. Like making sure that you're not just disregarding the needs of the people that you're in the van with.
I agree.
And man, you can build up some like crazy levels of toxicity, of resentment if there's somebody in the van who's always late, who always puts their needs first, who doesn't really listen to what is going on with other people in the van. And I think that we were just talking in one of the other interviews I did that we need to like have a Punk Rock 101 handbook. They won't actually be a book because nobody reads books anymore. It has to be on the web. But just simple things like, you know, like if you're in the opening or middle band, don't start breaking your drum kit down on stage. That's just like if you're spinning cymbal stand lug nuts after you play and there's another band still to play, you're fucking up. Like just grab the whole thing, carry it off stage, and break it down off stage.
Or if you're wrapping up cables, or wiping down your guitar.
Yeah, like maybe don't do that while there's another band waiting to play.
But a lot of people don't get those memos. I mean, you would think after all these years, but you still see it too, I'm sure. And it's kind of like, wow, this is how it's going to go. Or the guy that shows up is like, hey man, can I borrow your equipment? You know, like,
oh God, man, how many, like, there's a Hard Times. I love the Hard Times, the sort of punk rock onion. And there was that one like 3-band bill and no one brought a drum kit. Like,
it's okay if I use it, right? You know, so-and-so said it would be okay. I'm like, well, I don't even know who that is.
Yeah, I mean, it's not his drum kit, you know? Like, you're going to use the stupid double kick drum pedal and you're going to wear 2 spots through the coating on my drum head or put 2 new fresh dents in it. Like, fuck you. Bring your own shit.
Well, something you and I have talked about before, our love of the band Rusted Shut.
Oh, man, greatest band name of all time. The name I wish I had thought of first.
I went to South by Southwest, I think 2007, and they were playing at this place called The Parlor, which is on like the North Loop of Austin. It's a pizza shop. They were borrowing this equipment from this band called When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth. And
it's like another great band name.
So it was just one of those days. It's beautiful. South by Southwest day, kind of not a South by Southwest sanctioned showcase, right. Just a bunch of bands playing. Rusted Shut gets up to play. Well, before they do, they ask, oh, hey man, so we didn't bring any equipment. We just brought our And so the promoter kid said, yeah, that's fine. I think you just really wanted them to play. Oh my God. By the end, none of the gear worked. It was just, they blew up all the amps, and they really weren't that loud. I still just don't know to this day how they did it, but it was a total exercise in do not let Rusted Shut borrow your equipment.
I think that some bands just move in a cloud of chaos, like I Hate God and although I heard that they're not quite as much of a mess as they used to be in Rusted Shut. Remember we talked about doing a festival with a bunch of those bands, the Shambocalypse, I think we were going to call it.
I mean, I don't even know if they'd show up. Like, you know,
I mean, maybe just send a courier for them. You know, like put all those bands in one giant house and like just put cameras everywhere and we'll make a reality TV show out of it.
That would be the Big Brother I would like to watch.
Yeah. So Rusted Shut. I Hate God. Who else would be on that bill?
God. Well, now that Drunks with Guns is playing shows again.
Oh, hell yes. Lubricated Goat.
Yeah, you could bring all those bands. And right. I guess Flipper's back playing shows too.
Yeah, and Flipper.
David, it would be like the Outcast Big Brother.
Right.
It would be fun to watch. But
just get that truck liner stuff and dip all the equipment in it.
I mean, it's sad to say, but all that music just completely speaks to me about the bleakness and that's how ugly the world really is and can be at times. Right. Because I think some people have this, you know, if you're in a pop punk band or whatever, you kind of live in this illusion that those bands don't exist, but those bands do, and they live by their own code. And it's kind of fun.
You understand growing up in a small place that there's always that like punk couple that ends up like kidnapping a drummer or a bass player or whatever. And they live this insane life where they've sort of bent reality around themselves where things like showing up without any equipment makes sense to them. And that, like, to me, that is so much more punk than like Blink-182. Like it just, there's something about like, and those are the people that used to like collect like serial killer memorabilia, like just genuinely broken people who were sort of the foundation of like small town punk rock to me.
I mean, Charlotte, people don't really give Charlotte a lot of credit. Charlotte is where Morbid Angel formed.
I didn't know that. That's
Charlotte is the home of Buzz Oven.
yeah.
Charlotte's the home of Anti-Scene. And like Jeff Clayton was very good friends with Gigi Allen. He was here all the time.
Is the Milestone still open?
The Milestone is still open. And, I wish there was something that I could do to keep that place open because, there's so few places left in this world that make a difference in somebody's life.
Yeah.
But everything else in Charlotte is 21 and older.
Right.
And so where all these kids go? Like, where do they even have options to go? There's no Milestone. There's no me. You know? I mean, I think that those places are everywhere. I think if you grew up in DC, you feel that way about the 930 Club.
Right.
Because it was all ages and at least you had the opportunity to go.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't drink anymore. And
you don't?
Nope.
That's interesting. I don't.
Made the decision just probably better for everybody and me to stop.
Yeah. The decision was made for me, but I stuck with it.
I mean, my dad used to tell me all the time, he was a big drinker for years and quit one day. He said, one day you're going to want to not feel like shit anymore. You're going to want to wake up and not have to first tend to that hangover.
There's a famous Frank Sinatra quote where he said, I feel bad for people who don't drink because when they wake up in the morning, that's the best they're going to feel all day. Right. And I thought, boy, we've had different experiences with the bottle, buddy.
Yeah. I mean,
like my experience with it was that I would wake up and think, am I dead? Is this what being dead feels like? I just had no hope. And that was not the best I was going to feel all day for sure.
No, and it's kind of weird. I've noticed a lot of us as we get older, either some of us don't let off the gas and keep drinking.
Right.
And that's not so good. Or some people have just really realized that it's, hey, it's not all it's cracked up to be. But for me, it works better for me. And, hey, what works for me may not work for anybody else. I mean, I try to live better and, but definitely, I could definitely eat better and do a lot of other things. But
so was there a point that you hit that sort of propelled you into therapy? Like, did it get so bad at some point you're like, I've got to make some changes in my life? Yeah.
Within about 6 months after my dad died, I literally, I described this to people. That feeling of you, like when you're physically caught, like, you feel like people talk about, I have a monkey on my back or something's chasing me. Mm-hmm. I feel like my depression and my anxiety was like it ran up behind me and grabbed me.
Well, when Robert Johnson talks about the hellhound on his trail, I'm like, buddy, I feel you.
I mean, I called my mother and I said, if you don't get over here, I'm going to do something that's probably not good.
So you had a moment where you were contemplating self-harm.
Yep.
Yeah. And you called your mom, which is a solid call. I couldn't have really called my mom, but yeah.
She's all I got. You know, my sister at that point had taken a turn for the worse. Mm-hmm. She struggled almost 15 years with breast cancer.
Yeah.
She finally succumbed to it. She wasn't in a position to help me. Of course, you don't want to lay that on your daughter.
How old is your daughter at this point?
Let's see. This would have been 2010. So probably, what's 1921? So probably 10 or 11.
Oh, man. Yeah. That's nothing you want to put on a kid.
No. So, yeah, maybe a little older, but I just still, I knew I was in a bad place.
Did you do an inpatient thing at all, or did you just like make an appointment and go do an hour with a therapist?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, in our country, if you do anything, you don't get to see anybody immediately.
Right.
And thank God, my sister, who had been struggling with mortality and everything, she knew this woman that worked at the hospital locally that agreed to see me the next day.
That's amazing.
And I went to her twice a week for 2 weeks until I was able to somehow bullshit my way into get a referral to a therapist. But I mean, I was hearing like, yeah, we'll see you in 6 months. I'm like, yeah, but 6 months I'll already have taken care of myself in a bad way.
Right.
That's not going to work for me. But this lady sort of talked me off the ledge.
Yeah.
And that's what she does. Supposedly, when people have been told like they have their death sentence with cancer, they go to this clinic in the basement of the hospital, and she sort of helps make, if you can, a terrible situation as good as possible. But for me, it was, somebody who I didn't know very well, but was really easy to talk to. And she kind of didn't have a dog in the fight. And I needed, because there was nothing my mother could say to make it better.
Mm-hmm.
There was nothing my sister, any of my family members could make it any better for me. And sometimes you just need an outsider who does dog in the fight. But yeah, I was in bad shape, and it was just all stress, and it was just everything, I mean, I realized then I'm not set up for the corporate world.
Yeah.
I mean, I was running 7 Sonic drive-ins. There were 200 and some employees. And I just felt like every time I turned around, somebody needed something, somebody wanted something, and I just could not be. And I'm kind of a people pleaser, but you can't please 200 people.
Yeah. That's a trap.
Yeah. And I don't know, my dad, he was that guy. And I was never, my dad and I butted heads. My dad didn't understand punk rock. My dad didn't understand skateboarding. My dad didn't understand, anything that was left of center. And, he was a guy that played sports, and he wanted everybody to be like him. And I was never going to be like him. So we were always in this yin yang, situation with each other that, even went up right to the day he died.
Yeah.
It's sad, that now after being in therapy afterwards, I wished I'd have done a lot of things different, You just don't get a chance to do that. But
I was having a conversation with my daughter the other day, and she handed me a pad and a pencil, and she said, "Daddy, I want you to write down everything you want me to be when I grow up." And I handed it right back to her, and I said, "Sweet, there's only one thing I want you to be. You know what that is?" And she went, "A musician." I was like, "No, baby, I want you to be happy."
Yeah.
And it just cracks me up, though, that she has decided that what I want for her is for her to be a musician. She really wants to be a police officer. I'm like, "Baby, you can be anything you want in life."
Yeah.
And she's like, "I want to be a police officer." I'm like, "Okay."
I mean, just be happy,
Yeah, just be happy.
My dad used to say stuff to me, but I don't think he meant it. It's like, hey, if you want to be a trash man, be the best trash man.
Right.
But do you want me to be a trash man? Or do you want me to, or is this code for something else?
Right. You want to be like, "Dad, trash man might be kind of cool. You're going to find a lot of cool shit. People throw out all kinds of neat stuff,
I don't believe you. I think you want me to wear khaki pants and a collared shirt all the time.
Did you divest yourself of all these businesses that your dad left you? And
Yeah. Only thing my mother owns is the land and the buildings for Pizza Hut. Guys. And that's all I've dealt with helped her with the last, 9 years. I mean, my dad had a massive stroke. One day he's here, next day he's not. And, when somebody like that thinks they're going to live forever, they don't know what it's like. They don't have a clue about buttoning shit up, and nothing was buttoned up. And it's been a struggle on my mother, and my sister passing was this huge.
No parents wired for their kid to pass.
No. I mean, that LP I put out, I recorded the year my sister really took a turn for the year, the worse. And it took about a year for her to pass away. And I recorded that record at the start of it. And some of it I even ripped up and redid it in the studio at Kyle's, which is kind of crazy. And I listen to that record and it makes me sad because there's nothing happy about that record. I mean, you definitely hear my angst and you can hear how just real pissed off I am at the world. And, the next thing you know, I kind of put that record on the back burner, and then Reiner Learning Curve puts it out, and it shows up as my sister's in her last 30 days of her life.
Oh God.
And it was just like so far from I wasn't even thinking about it.
Yeah.
But I've always felt like I've surrounded myself with good people. Like Multicult are good folks.
My first podcast I interviewed Jake.
Oh, he's the best.
He's an amazing drummer, an amazing guy.
They took us out. I ended up getting Adam from the Seahorse, and I had played with this kid, Matt Culler from Baltimore, Richmond area, and he played drums on that. And we did a tour down to Texas and back with Multicult, and I kind of really didn't want to do it, but I felt obligated to do it. Somebody had put a record out, but Nick just kept writing me and just kept saying, "Hey man, I'll set up the shows." And, that's all. I mean, you don't have to worry about that. You just come, you just get out there and do it.
Do you think Nick was taking an active interest in sort of getting you out of the house in the wake of your sister's death to kind of give you like some time in the sun, get out, get some sunshine and some fresh air?
I don't know if he knew to that extent.
Yeah.
I think they were all fans of the band, which anytime somebody's a fan of that band, I'm completely shocked.
Right.
Like, okay.
Like I wrote a record that's essentially my sister's death mask. You're a fan of that, huh?
Yeah. I mean, you want to hear me at my worst.
Right.
I mean, I would watch them some nights and they would laugh because just watching that shit performed live, I can only imagine I don't even really pay attention to what other people are doing, but I'm sure it's very uncomfortable for a patron to sit through that, especially at volumes like that that I play at. But
volumes that could be described as architectural because they'll actually shift.
Yeah, they just shift everything. But he did, and I've now expressed that to definitely Nick and Rebecca and even Jake, and that how grateful I am. And I've said it, if I say it once, I say it 100 times. They really sort of like, hey, go do this, And I realized my mom was like, I worried about my mother. I worried about who's going to take care of my daughter. My mom's like, I got this. You go do what you need to do.
Right.
And Adam is a dear friend of mine. He's in the Seahorse and lives in Minneapolis. We came down, rehearsed, and it was like we picked right back up where we were when we recorded and just went out and did it. And it was great, Can
you tell me a crazy story about Adam physically wounding himself playing one of these sets? I'm trying to remember that. Maybe I've got this wrong.
Well, it was always a lot of blood, like hard strumming. And he had taken a K-oscillator, like those little handheld things.
Yeah.
Somehow rewired it into the jack of his Telecaster. So if you listen to that record, there's all this crazy stuff. You're like, well, what is that? Like, how did somebody do that? It was literally him rubbing his finger over the K-oscillator pad while he's playing the guitar. And it was always just a lot of carnage. It was so hot then. We had and that was one of the only tours I've done in years where there was no equipment failure, which is usually something that plagues us.
So 5/8 used to do 200 to 220 shows a year, and I would just break so many cymbals and so many bass drum pedals and so many drum heads. And I don't think people realize the stress that playing truly spirited, like loud music hundreds of times, with the stress that puts on equipment. Most equipment is designed to be purchased at Guitar Center and then put in a closet.
Yeah. I mean, most of my stuff is vintage and old and kind of made to hold up. But I mean, that was only 6 shows, but I played less than that where speakers blow, amps start smoking. We're just extremely hard on our gear, and I expect a lot of it. But
did you get one of those Fender Festival amps recently?
The
PV.
PV, yeah, the
Yeah.
FAV.
So that amp, I've sort of heard rumors about this being like the loudest amp ever made or something. That's like a tube amp. Tell me about that amp.
It's a solid state, actually.
Yeah.
It's the amp that Death from Above 1979 plays.
Yeah.
That guy Jesse, the bass player. It's just, I have yet to really get to crank it up, but it's every time I've ever heard one, it's kind of unholy.
Right.
But I mean, I have an SVT as well. I mean, I have a ton of amps that are over 300 watts. That one claim is 400 at 2 ohms.
Right.
Which is just a lot.
Yeah. Bananas.
Yeah. And as I've gotten older, I've changed my gear around and tried to be like smarter of getting more efficient speakers and just not being, total like ass clown about stuff. Right. I've always kind of been in the back, because I have a reputation of that as well. But yeah, I don't know.
So you started this focus in therapy and also continued to play music and worked on getting better. And your daughter this whole time is getting older. And I think the last time we hung out together in person was when Powder Room came through Charlotte, and your daughter was just getting ready to go to the United States Military Academy or something.
Well, she's going to go in the Air Force. She's been and out with her mother, which has been a kind of a weird little turn of events. She has decided, I mean, she's still living her life. She's wanting to have a relationship with her mom.
I mean, who wouldn't, right?
Right. And I get it. But I wanted her to know it may not work out the way you want it to.
Yeah, man.
And it is really, really hard to watch your kid get popped in the mouth. So proverbially.
Going to a dry well is how I've heard it described.
Yep. She now was here at Christmas, and she still makes concessions for her.
Mm-hmm.
And,
sure.
And she always will, and I get it. But I wish it was more for her.
There's a book called The Fantasy Bond. Are you familiar with The Fantasy Bond? So it's a book about how people with absentee or just like parents that are just not plugged in often build this ideal relationship in their head with the parent. They create an ideal parent in place of the parent that's not actually like doing the job of parenting. And the damage that does is they carry that ability to sort of fabricate or synthesize an ideal person in place of their caregiver. They take that skill into adult relationships. Like you get a significant other, and you decide who that person's going to be, like, and you're not really dealing with who they really are, and it creates a terrible conflict in the relationship. The book is not great. It's written by a doctor of psychology, and it's very dry, and I had a really hard time with it. Like it's not episodic. Like I'm the kind of person that learns by seeing things in action, and it's very sort of theoretical and dry. But I think the underlying core concept is sound, that the sort of fantasy bond that we form with absentee parents is something that actually poisons our ability to have intimate relationships later. And your daughter sounds like when you make concessions for that parent, that's sort of one of the outward signs that like you're not really dealing with them in real terms, that you're sort of romanticizing or idealizing this relationship. But I mean, it's just because your daughter wants her mom to love her,
Yeah. And I, for a long time, her mom just wanted to be her friend.
Yeah.
And you can't do that.
No.
That's just it's not healthy, but I was told a long time ago to bite my tongue, to not say a lot. And even my therapist said that I need to definitely limit trying to trash her mother. And that's a hard thing to do, especially when you see her doing wrong. But, she's just got to figure it out on her own. And my dad used to always say, one day she's going to wake up and realize everything.
Right.
I don't know when that's going to happen, but, I'll be here for her when she does.
One of the things about being an adoptive parent is you're coached a lot about not trashing birth parents.
Right.
So my daughter, we have an open adoption. She knows who her birth parents are. And the problem with saying, look, your birth parents are kind of a mess and they have these, and this other set of problems is that your kid's going to internalize those like, well, that's my DNA and that's who I am.
Right.
So you got to be careful about running, like just reading the riot act on the absentee parent, because the kid's going to she'll figure it out, man.
Yeah. I mean, like when you were talking about just being depressed and everything, like I was really down. And during that time after that, I had met Mark Duitrom, that was in the Melvins, during like the Stoner Witch Stag era.
Yeah.
And he, has become a friend of mine. And I remember like just talking to him, and he's lived a life that I can't even imagine, like he put out the early Melvins records when he was here, and he was in the Melvins and he was their sound man and just did a ton of stuff. He recommended this book to me, and the name totally escapes me, but that book it was like maybe like 100 pages, and it was just about loss and just that it's okay. And I just remember him telling me like, hey, you should get this book. And, man, things are going to be all right. Like you're going to get through all this. Like this is not going to last forever.
If you remember that book, email it to me and I'll put the title in the show description so people can.
I'm going to look it up when I get done. But it was just, it's not, I mean, I've always been very fortunate to either have really good friends or be surrounded with good people that have told me stuff like that, and
I think people underestimate the amount of self-care that happens in the whole punk rock thing, because you don't fall out of a tree like being into bands like Rusted Shut or I Hate God,
No.
Like you don't have a normal childhood. And at some point, you either like fully embrace the void and just become a full-time mess with whatever substances you're going to do to avoid feeling that pain, or you start getting better. And, there's a strong contingent of people around punk rock who have really kind of helped me just get right. Thor Harris has been a huge advocate for people dealing with their depression, and if they need meds, taking their meds. And he's a super solid guy with a heart of gold. And
I've only met him one time.
He and I, this is a funny story, and I'm going to interview him soon. He and I are working on when he gets back from Europe with Shushu. We're going to sit down and do an interview. But he and I, he was here through a whole set of circumstances that we probably get into in the interview, but he ended up staying with me for a couple of days, and we ended up taking care of this person I don't really know, a friend of my wife who's an actress, just showed up with her like 18-month-old daughter and was like, where's Lisa? Lisa's directing a play. She's not here. My wife's an actor and a theater director. And she's like, I had asked her if she could watch my daughter, and Thor and I were like, we already got a kid here, my kid, and sure, I guess. And I guess my wife said, let me talk to my husband. And then this person just assumed that was a yes. And so Thor and I ended up babysitting this little, the kid from Monsters, Inc. This kid looked just like the kid from Monsters, Inc. And I have pictures of Thor holding this baby, while I'm making dinner. We were like, Mr. Mom. It was pretty hilarious. But that's just a good guy. He's a solid guy.
Right. And then, for every solid guy, there's a bunch of assholes out there too, unfortunately, that I've run across. And I just like to steer clear of those people,
I mean, I don't have any obligation at this point in my life to give those dudes any oxygen. Like, they're going to be there. And a lot of them are sort of, they resent it when you get better. Like, the last thing I think some people want to see is for the people that they don't like to be happy. And I just want everybody to be okay. But, I don't have any obligation to be in those people's lives anymore.
No, and I know, when you asked me to be a part of this, it made me think a lot. I know a lot of my friends struggle with depression and with other things.
I just want to get to a point where we as as creative people who carry these things around, aren't afraid to say to our peers, like, hey man, you okay?
Yeah. I mean, one of my dear friends is Joe Preston, and I know he's struggled with depression, and stuff. But he also lives in the Pacific Northwest, which is like a haven to me for depression.
Well, I think that's just a lack of sunlight.
Yeah,
and also you get this sort of I had a friend who was he studied bovine agriculture at the University of Georgia, and we were talking one time. He asked me like why is it so many musicians are just so fucked up? And I was like, well, man, take your high density feedlot. You know, like it becomes kind of a haven for pathology when you group all these animals together, and like I think that you get just sort of the already the climate driven inclination towards depression in the Pacific Northwest with all the like lack of sunlight, and then you start sort of rolling chemicals and bad relationships into that mix. And yeah, it's not a good, if you're depressed, maybe give some thought to Charlotte or Atlanta or Athens or something where the sun shines 200 days a year, because that's not a good situation up there, I don't think.
No, I don't either. But some people, I guess, have a hard time pulling themselves out of a situation.
I mean, the summers are glorious there, and I get like having a community around you, but man, like February in Spokane is not a great time.
No, I just think that they could be doing something else, and when you were asking me like a little bit when you and I've talked before we did this thing, I mean, it made me look at like my community here.
Yeah.
And a lot of these kids, I mean, like it's weird being the old guy kind of in the scene. And
yeah, tell me about it.
You watch these kids like, oh man, that kid used to be straight edge. Oh man, shit, he's a cokehead now. Holy shit. He's just a damn train wreck. And some of these bands, it's just, I don't know. It's like they don't realize the simpler times and they don't pay attention to it. Because, Charlotte's been one of those places that's never been a scene. It's always kind of had an identity crisis. Fetch and Bones were big in the 80s.
No, I remember.
And then, Urban Angel realized that to get big, they needed to move to Florida. And then moved to Richmond to get big. And Anti-Scene stayed here. And there was a little moment in the mid-90s when Hope Nichols had this band called Sugar Smack.
Yeah, I remember Sugar Smack.
Sugar Smack and this band Jolene, which were like kind of alt country.
Mm-hmm.
And this band called Muscadine, all signed to Sire Records. And it was kind of weird. Charlotte's little lightning in a bottle moment.
Yeah, I think, was it 1313 open then and Tremont Music Hall? That was all happening then.
And, it was a lot. And that's it, because Chapel Hill was Chapel Hill. And
will always be Chapel Hill. I'd love it.
Kind of a dead scene, really. I mean, like I couldn't name 5 bands from there.
Yeah.
Like for years you could always count on Merge Records being headquartered in Chapel Hill. Well, they're in Durham now.
Yeah.
There's way more going on in Durham. There's way more going on in Raleigh. And it's just different, and of course, Asheville's a big player in North Carolina. I mean, you can tour North Carolina, and back in the day, Wilmington was definitely a place you wanted to play.
I mean, I played Reggie's last year with a band. I mean, Wilmington's still going.
I mean, like the Mad Monk was there and Jacob's Run. Those were like, they got all the shows. But I mean, I know people used to come to North Carolina and play like 4 or 5 times. And
you
never cannibalized each other.
The Japanese rock band I play with, Pinky Doodle Poodle, is going to do a run of dates this summer where we're just going to play in North Carolina with Death Tapes, Matt Gentling's new thing, and this psychedelic band from Chapel Hill with Alex Maiolo called Lacey Jags. We're going to just do a run of like, Asheville, Charlotte, Greensboro, Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, Wilmington. Like you can do all of that. I mean, North Carolina is, people don't realize how vast it is, but if you drive from like, the far west, like Asheville, or if you start in, say, Johnson City, which is right across the line in Tennessee, and drive all the way to the Outer Banks, that's a 9-hour drive, man. There's a lot of geography there.
Yeah. It's a beautiful place. It's just, but there's definitely a lot of places to play. It got me thinking when I met you really for the first time was when you guys stayed at my house.
Yes.
And you guys were having trouble because the van just smelled like gas.
Oh yeah, and then 3 days later it burned all the way down to the axles.
I remember you guys having trouble starting it in my driveway.
Yeah.
And I was just and literally when that happened, I was just completely dumbfounded. Like holy shit, like that could have happened at any other time.
Yeah.
I can't believe it was 3 days later.
Yeah.
So you guys went to Greensboro the next night.
You played New York Pizza, which I love that place.
Yeah. And then I don't know where, and then you were in Chapel Hill, right? Where the van exploded.
We played in Carborough at Local 506, and then we stayed with Alex from Lacey Jags. The next morning we woke up. It's time to go back to Athens. That was my first run of dates with Powder Room. And Bubba was driving, and he started the engine, and we had been sort of smelling gas the whole time, but, an old Dodge with those weird 2-barrel carburetors that they have with that weird biscuit that sometimes gets warped, and you'll smell gas. It's just part of owning a Dodge of that vintage. But the smell of gas in the van was so strong you could taste it. And I was like, man, let's have a look and make sure we don't actually see gasoline leaking from somewhere in the engine. Right. And right when Bubba put it in park, we heard that like bump of ignition, like, when you light a gas stove or something, but only like much bigger. and smoke started pouring through the vents in the van. And I was like, okay, we're on fire. And so we started the world's fastest van unpack. First thing, grab the money, because we'd made some money on that run, and we were throwing everybody's personal gear off into the weeds in Alex driveway. And then I started unloading the equipment because Powder Room, you may recall, had been robbed a year earlier in Chicago and lost all of their equipment. And I wasn't about to let that happen again. And so, I was throwing equipment to Bubba and Gene, and we unloaded everything but the Marshall 215 base cabinet and the V4 cabinet, because they were both just too heavy for me to pull out of this van that was burning. It was starting to fill with smoke. And then a state patrolman stopped me from going after the Marshall because I knew it was a pretty rare cabinet. But we got everything else out of the van. It was still a complete disaster for the band and for the guys because, Gene had to fight the insurance company in the garage that had recently just done those repairs and had left something undone to the point where the van burned up. But it was pretty wild. State trooper got between me and the van as I was going after the 15. It was like, son, if that airbag blows up, it's going to kill you. So we backed away and watched it burn. It was an awful day.
Yeah, I just remember, then Gene sent me those pictures, and I was just completely like, holy shit. Because we went to breakfast that morning, remember, before you left town.
At that diner.
Yep. And, but yeah, it's just kind of like, I don't know. I got to thinking like that was the first time you and I hung out, because the night before we had played together.
Yes.
At that place called The Station. But I mean, that's still like, but that just shows that, man, things can change on a moment with anything. Yeah. I had never seen anything like that, and I can't imagine what it's like to experience it.
Interestingly, I didn't freak out until after everything was out of the van and it started to catch the trees above it on fire, because flames were shooting like 30 feet into the air at that point. And then I realized, like, oh man, we could have been going down the highway when that happened, and that would have been a fucking mess. Trying to get everything out of the van, or worse, having the van fill with smoke before we could get off the highway would have been just a complete disaster. But
and I know that you are like me. You've traveled a lot. You drive down the interstate, and all of a sudden you see a van or a car that is completely burned up on the side of the road. And then you start to go, I wonder what happened. Like, how did it happen? So somebody was in the car. Hopefully they got out of the car.
Yes.
But it just, I don't know, it makes your mind start to wander. When
no tour vehicle I tour in will ever not have a fire extinguisher in it ever again. That's part of my rules. Like, always bring your own pillow and always have a fire extinguisher.
Is that the way it is in 5.8 when you guys tour?
Oh, yeah. I'm not going to watch another van full of equipment burn up.
Right. You guys have been together for so long anyway.
Yeah, we did 200 shows a year for about 6 years. And so I have seen most of the country through the windows of a van.
With them too, right?
Oh, yeah. With them. And then, I've done a bunch of touring with some other bands too. I was in Psychedelic Furs for a while, but we'll talk about that. All right. I don't want to start beating on my resume, but when we get to the end of these discussions for Crash and Ride, I like to do this little short set of questions that I've come up with, like the lightning round, as Noel from He called it. You may be familiar with the 10 questions that James Lipton uses to end the Actor Studio that were actually from a French, I think, radio or TV host named Bernard Pivot. But I have my own questions because I think everybody has preconceived answers for those others if they've ever seen it. So if you're ready, we can jump into that.
Sure.
All right. First question. What is your favorite meal that you've ever had?
A steak at Peter Luger's.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, in Brooklyn.
When was that?
God, that's been some years ago. I'm a huge steak fan.
So what's your cut?
I like the Kansas City strip, actually.
Yeah.
When it's cooked.
I'm a bone-in ribeye guy.
Yeah, I like that too. I'm not, and everybody wants to say filet. I think there's better cuts of meat than a filet.
Yeah.
When it's cooked proper.
I'll eat anything steak frite though. Like if you're gonna do the French thing, you hand me an old shoe cooked like that. I'm good with it. I love steak frite. It's really great. So is that something you've done more than once, or was it just a one-time Peter Luger thing? Or
my parents have been there too with my sister, but yeah, I had heard from my sister's oncologist that it was the best steak, and it was as advertised.
I have heard though that like they also have an incredible burger. Like you can go in at not peak hours, sit at the bar, and get out of there for less than a rent payment, and get an incredible burger.
I've heard that too. I've never had it. I've had steak both times, but and the au gratin potatoes.
Oh man,
yeah,
yeah, that sounds amazing. Second question: what is the most frightened you've ever been?
Probably after my dad died.
Yeah. Was there a particular moment, or was it just a lingering existential horror?
It was just kind of like when I realized that he had actually stopped breathing. I didn't want to be in
that moment.
But I was forced to. I'd never physically seen someone stop breathing before and die.
I've been through that a couple times, particularly with my mom when she passed.
But, when my grandparents died, I wasn't in the room. I wasn't there to physically see it. And I was there to see it with my sister 2 years later. What doesn't make it any easier.
Yeah.
But I mean, I was pretty scared there too. Like
it's something to lose your dad though, because your dad ends up being in many ways your masculine role model, whether he was a good one or not. In your case, But my dad told me once that when both of his parents, when they had both passed, he realized in a lot of ways that he was in some ways just alone in the world without his mom and dad anymore.
I felt that. That's one of the biggest feelings I felt when I saw him pass. Yeah.
Yeah. I still got my dad and my stepdad. My mom passed. I had just gone to lay down. Like she was having agonal breaths, but it got to be super late at night and I was absolutely exhausted. And my stepdad put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You need to go lay down," because I was just abjectly miserable. And then I'd probably been laid down for less than 30 minutes and he came and got me and said, "Your mom's passed." And so I went and said goodbye. It was pretty rough.
Yep.
Third question. Of all the things you've lost, what do you feel the most regret about losing?
Oh man. I don't know. Maybe my innocence. In some ways.
It's so funny when you're a skateboarding punk rock teenager, you can't wait to get rid of your innocence. You just want it to go away and be done with. You want to like drink deeply from the well of rock and roll excess, and then years later you're like, oh fuck.
My parents lived in a subdivision, and we used to sit on our BMX bikes at the end of the road. It's a highway that goes toward Davidson. It's headed west.
Yeah.
And we used to be like, I wonder where they're headed. Man, I wish we could go with them. Like, we didn't even know where the hell they were going. They might have been going to Food Lion.
Right.
We just thought they were going somewhere. But I just couldn't wait to grow up. Couldn't wait to get out of here. That was always like, I kind of wished I wasn't in such a hurry back then.
I used to wonder what kids in California think in their first car when they have a full tank of gas. Because I always used to think, oh man, we could drive this thing to California.
Yeah.
What the hell do I think of California?
I don't know if you saw my post a couple weeks ago when they saw Jake Phelps died from Thrasher. And I put how Thrasher had such a huge influence on me as a kid. It was like my Bible.
Yeah, me too.
That's why I saw punk rock, and I got to see how kids on the West Coast skateboarded, what they looked like, what they were into. I mean, it was definitely a life-changing moment for sure.
Those Thrasher compilations were my conduit into West Coast punk rock.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was good stuff.
I was fortunate enough to get into punk rock because of flip sides.
Mm-hmm.
Davis in college had flip sides on Sunday night at 10 o'clock. and I used to record it onto cassettes and sit and listen to it, and then and then record it again the next week.
Yeah, I was voracious about getting new punk music, and I liked all of it, which is bizarre to me now because I'm so picky about stuff. But at the time, I was like, Angry Samoans, love it. Dead Milkmen, love it. And then like real punk rock, got into like Poison Idea and all that stuff. Obscure stuff. There was a band from Chicago called Life Sentence. I just loved it all. I wanted to have all of it. And now, like, man, you couldn't drag me to a Dead Milkman show with a gun to my head. But
I think I'm with you.
Yeah. What's your favorite place to gig?
Oh, wow. Probably, I like the Milestone.
Yeah, me too.
There's just something about it. Even though sometimes it's had its moments, where it's on life support. I mean, I think to this day, besides Churchill's, it's the last like punk rock bastion left in the United States.
Yeah. I mean, it's the real thing.
Yeah. I mean, granted, there's some stupid graffiti, but there's some real graffiti too that still is kind of there. But I don't know of any other place that has the history it does.
I'm glad I don't have to mop that bathroom though.
Oh God!
Because nobody pees in the toilet because you're standing there looking up at like, oh my God, look at that! I haven't thought about that band in 20 years because there's stickers on the wall, at like head height, and like the next thing you know, you've like missed the toilet. It's pretty disgusting.
I mean, you fall through. I think the particle board is like soaking wet with piss. Yeah, I definitely would say the Milestone.
It's definitely it's real. It's the CBGBs of the South in many ways.
I just hope it makes it, I mean, I really do. I mean, I hope that for a lot of places, but that side of town is gentrifying kind of at a lightning speed.
There was always that soul food place next door.
Yeah, the Soul Shack, it's closed finally.
Oh, man. I used to get such good fried fish there. It was so great.
That's where all the punk clubs were in Charlotte back in the day. Like, there was Church of Musical Awareness. There was the International Club. And then for a short-lived moment, like catty corner to the Milestone down the street, kind of across from the Soul Shack, was the Hall of Fame. And that's where the Accused played, like for Martha Splatterhead tour.
I haven't thought about that band. The Accused, Martha Splatterhead. Holy cow.
But
Splatter Rock.
But it was that little side of town had like 3 or 4 punk clubs.
Now it's gentrifying, huh?
Yeah, it's coming that way quick. Charlotte's just always wants to be Atlanta.
No, man.
Fighting so hard to be that.
It's like, have you been to Atlanta?
Yeah. I mean, and have you been to Charlotte is the next question.
Yeah, exactly. So next question, visa and income considerations aside, if you could live anywhere, where would you live?
Ireland.
Really?
Yep.
I've never been there. All the touring I've done, I haven't been to Ireland, but man, when I meet Irish people, I'm just like, I feel this kinship. It's weird. It's hard to describe.
I just like the people there. They're kind of like they hark back to what's lost in America. Like, I mean, granted, it's all changed with the Celtic Tiger too in some ways, but they do. You get out into the rural areas and they do live in simpler times.
I just never met people more ready to laugh and or cry, and sometimes both in the same conversation than Irish people I've met. And I'm just like, this is how I want to live, just completely emotionally available all the time.
Yeah, if I could live there, I would totally live there, without a doubt.
Yeah, I need to get there, man. I've known a bunch of Irish in New York, and there's a couple of people here in Athens who are just lovely Irish people, and it just makes me think, why have I never gone there?
Right. You should definitely go. I think you'd really like it.
Yeah, I just want to check it out. So next question, what is your perfect instrument, and do you already own it or not?
I think I do. It's a 1974 Mocha Brown P bass.
Oh man, I'm already jealous.
And the finish is coming off of it.
Perfect.
But, that's the one. I mean,
had you just gotten that bass when we first met? I think I remember you dragging that thing out when we stayed with you, and
I had just gotten it working. It had some electronics issues, which I was able. At first, I had to replace the pots, which kind of pained me a little bit. Yeah. But I was able to send the original pots off, and this guy soaks them in something and is able to free them up to work. So I've got it back all original now, and I'm doing the same thing to my '78 Les Paul Deluxe.
Cool.
Finally putting the mini humbuckers back in it,
Oh,
like it
badass.
should. So yeah, I would definitely say I was a Gibson bass guy for years.
Which Gibson bass? The Ripper?
You name it. I had an RD Artist. I had a Ripper. I had a Grabber. I had a Victory. I had a Flying V bass.
Really?
Yeah.
Cool.
And they were all great, and they all had that really blown out, distorted sound. And someone's like, dude, just get a P bass. What are you doing? You know? And I was like, oh, everybody plays a P bass. I don't want to play a P bass. And handed me this P bass, and all of a sudden it was kind of like the sound I'd wanted to hear was there. And the feel of the neck, it was just right.
I think there's something, the P bass is one of the coolest machines ever built. Like, it does the job of bass better than just about anything else.
I mean, they really got it right with the placement of the pickup in the middle. I mean, it's just, like I thought about getting another one so I don't lean on this one so hard. Because the finish is just starting to come off the top. But some people might go, oh, well, that's great. But then all the stupid collectors are like, oh, man, that bass is all messed up.
Oh, man, I've got a huge drum set collection just from all the years of finding them in pawn shops or seeing things on Craigslist that were egregiously undervalued. And if they get beat up, man, they get beat up. They're meant to be played. I'm not going to put anything behind velvet ropes,
Yeah, I have none of my amps. I mean, I don't have anything, pedals, nothing. It all gets played, and it all gets played hard. I don't believe in sticking stuff in a case or under your bed or in a closet just to say that I have it.
Right. I don't understand that mentality at all.
It doesn't make any sense to me. But, there's a bunch of collector people that, oh, this has the wrong knobs on it.
Those folks can usually play like 3 chords, and they have enormous record collections because they're about acquisition, not application.
Yeah. I mean, I've had my fair share of shitty guitars. Some of them were kind of cool and I wish I'd have kept, but I didn't. So, but I actually I like to think I have quality stuff now. Like, I've gotten into restoring things, and I found a 1971 Marshall B cabinet.
Oh, hell yeah.
And I am going to re-Tolex it. I just got a piece of new old stock, 40-year-old salt and pepper cane grill to put on it.
Oh, cool.
So that's kind of like just something I do as a hobby, but I'm going to play it. Once it's done, I'm going to play it.
Yeah, play it out, man.
Yep, I'm not going to just set it in my room. So that's what I like to do for fun.
Yeah. So, last question. If you had to give up music, is there another job that you'd rather do?
Oh, woodworking? Like just all? Yeah.
I mean, that covers a lot of ground. I mean, a framing carpenter is a woodworker. Do you mean like furniture or fine art, or
like restoring furniture, making something back really good again? Like, I'm really good at looking at something and seeing that it's not right, but I can make it right. Kind of like I did with I'm doing with that Marshall cabinet.
Yeah.
I've restored some old Ampeg bass cabinets and sold them. Like, I like to find stuff too that's undervalued and cheap, or somebody's left for dead. And make it back good again.
Yeah, I have an Ampeg B25 bass amp, and the whole thing started with Andy Baker had one of the cabinets at his studio with 2 blown square magnet speakers in it, and there was no back in the cabinet, and I gave him like $100 for it, or something like $50. I don't even remember. And then I went and found the appropriate piece of Baltic birch plywood and Tolexed it to match that, and then put 2 Jensens in it that were close to the Ampeg spec. And then went and found the head. A buddy of mine in Louisville from that band Young Widows found the head for me and shipped it to me. And now it's the full, it's got the little sled with the wheels on it, and it's a cool. It ends up being the bass cabinet that we use for almost every 5/8 practice, and it's a cool cabinet. I like it a lot.
Yeah, I think I've always enjoyed woodworking and building stuff, making stuff. I guess if I wasn't around with, but I've kind of figured out the way to have both by doing it and also doing musical instrument stuff.
Yeah.
But if I couldn't do anything gear related, that would definitely be like refinishing an old dresser, fixing a piece of furniture or a chair or something.
It always cracks me up though, like the Antiques Roadshow. They're always like, "Don't refinish it."
Yeah.
But I mean, people got to use stuff, man.
Yeah, and I'm all for it. I mean, like once I finish something, I want to use it. I don't want to just set it inside of the room. I mean, I know enough of my friend's parents' house where it was like a goddamn museum where it was like, oh, don't put your feet up on that coffee table. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize.
Right.
I apologize. I mean, my dad built a house and he's like, yeah, it's not going to be a goddamn museum. You wear your shoes around. You don't have to take your shoes off at the door. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm of that faith as well. Like to where you definitely don't treat stuff that way. You use it. If you buy it, use it.
Yeah.
If not, don't buy it. So leave it for somebody else to pick up.
Right. Well, man, this has been great. I really appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, man. I hope it helped somebody,
Yeah, I mean, me too. My
little way of seems to work for me, but you never know. Everybody's a little bit different.
I think every solution is unique,
Right.
There's that great Dostoevsky quote about happy families all being the same, but every miserable family is miserable in its own unique way. And I think that the path to getting better is different for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, I know I'm never going to be perfect. That's kind of the irony of like my dad coming out that day telling me he's cured. Like, really? Okay, wow. It's kind of like a infomercial on TV in 6 easy installments. You can get your anger.
It's like that joke about the kid whose dad buys him a bass, says, "I'll pay for the bass lessons and the bass and the amp, but you got to go to your lessons." You heard this joke? And the kid comes home from the first lesson. His dad says, "What did you learn?" He says, "Well, Dad, I learned open E," and he plays the E. And his dad's like, "That's great, son." And then the next week, a kid comes home and his dad says, "How was your lesson?" And the kid says, "It was great. Today I learned open A." And it's like A. And then the next week the kid comes home and his dad says, "How was your lesson?" And the kid says, "I didn't go, Dad." And his dad was like, "What? I thought we had a deal. Like you were going to go to the lessons and I was going to pay for it. And I was going to pay for your bass and your amp, but you got to go to the lessons." And the kid was like, "Look, Dad, I couldn't. I had a gig."
That's awesome. Yeah, we totally think that,
Yeah.
I remember thinking, oh man, these lessons are stupid. What am I doing? Now I would give nothing to go back and do it again and do it the right way.
Yeah. Learning to control the other strings to me has been the hardest part of playing bass. Like not having like an open A ringing while I'm playing something on the E string. Like it's just, as a drummer, you want everything wide open ringing all the time, but that's just me.
Well, yeah, for power takeoff, I do. I need all the strings buzzing as fast as possible.
I mean, this has been great. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Thanks, Patrick, for asking me.
Thank you.
Yep. Take care of yourself.
You too. All right. That was great, man. I'm so glad he was able to do that. Hey, thanks for listening. Remember, keep an eye out for Crash and Ride Espresso. It'll be available in the Jittery Joe's web store, and I'm also going to make it available as part of the pledge packages on our Patreon page. I'll make a big announcement when the time comes. It's going to be great. Remember, if you need help, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 24/7. It's confidential. It's free. 1-800-273-8255. That's 1-800-273-8255. Also, if you need to reach the show, it's crashandride@protonmail.com. Get in touch. Remember, take care of yourself. Be kind to yourself. Reach out for help if you need it. Be here tomorrow. And remember, loud guitars save lives. Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the Crash and Ride podcast. I'm Patrick Ferguson. I'm your host. Today's guest is Gus Engstrom, a musician and promoter from Charlotte, North Carolina. Gus plays in Manpower. Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the Crash and Ride podcast. I'm Patrick Ferguson. I'm your host. Today's guest is Gus Engstrom. He's a musician and promoter from Charlotte, North Carolina, and plays in the band Powered Takeoff. Gus promoted shows. Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the Crash and Ride podcast. I'm Patrick Ferguson. I'm your host. Today's guest is Gus Engstrom, a musician and promoter from Charlotte, North Carolina. Gus plays in the band Powered Takeoff, and he was also an early supporter of the Southern noise rock scene, promoting bands like Harvey Milk at clubs like Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the Crash and Ride podcast. I'm Patrick Ferguson. I'm your host. Today's guest is Gus Engstrom, a musician and promoter from Charlotte, North Carolina. Gus plays in the band Powered Takeoff, and he's been a promoter for a lot of noise rock shows in the Southeast. He was an early supporter of Harvey Milk. He promoted shows at Punk Landmark. Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the Crash and Ride podcast. I'm Patrick Ferguson. I'm your host. Today's guest is Gus Engstrom, a musician and promoter from Charlotte, North Carolina. Gus plays in the band Powered Takeoff, but more importantly, I think in a lot of ways, Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the Crash and Ride podcast. I'm Patrick Ferguson. I'm your host. Today's guest is Gus Engstrom, a musician and promoter from Charlotte, North Carolina. Gus plays in the band Powered Takeoff, and he's promoted a lot of southern noise rock shows through the years at Punk Landmark, The Milestone in Charlotte, North Carolina. He was an early supporter of Harvey Milk and a lot of the other great southern noise rock bands that maybe aren't as well known as Harvey Milk, but we share a lot of... Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the Crash and Ride podcast. I'm Patrick Ferguson. I'm your host. Today's guest is Gus Engstrom, a musician and promoter from Charlotte, North Carolina. Gus plays... Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the Crash and Ride podcast. I'm Patrick Ferguson. I'm your host. Today's guest is Gus Engstrom, a musician and promoter from Charlotte, North Carolina. Gus plays in the band Powered Takeoff. As a promoter, he's brought tons of great noise rock and punks. We'll start over here. Okay, we're here with Gus.